Story 1 credited to Daniel Hayes. You ever have that moment where you realize you've made a mistake, but it's too late to turn back? Yeah, that was me, standing at the base of Ridgeback Trail, watching the sun dip lower in the sky, realizing I'd started way too late. I've always liked hiking solo. Something about the quiet, the stillness, it gets to me. Clears my head, but I'm not stupid. I know how to be prepared. I'd hiked Ridgeback a few times before, always with friends, and I thought, why not give it a go alone this time? I figured, worst case scenario, I'd be back at the car before nightfall. Stupid. I took a quick glance at the trailhead sign. Didn't bother with the map because, well, I was familiar enough with it. So I threw my backpack over my shoulder, made sure I had plenty of water, and started up. The first part of the hike was uneventful. Birds chirping, the wind rustling through the trees, the kind of peace you go out there to find. I passed a few people on their way down, gave them the usual nod, but they didn't stick around to chat. I wasn't looking for company anyway. It wasn't until about 2 hours in that things started feeling off. I had been on this trail enough times to know the landmarks. The old twisted oak tree that looks like something straight out of a horror movie. The rocky outcrop where people usually stop to take in the view. But I wasn't seeing them. I checked my phone, tried to pull up the GPS, but of course no signal. Out here, that's not weird. I mean, it's the middle of nowhere. But when I stopped for water and turned to look back down the trail, that's when I realized I hadn't seen another person in over an hour. Not a single hiker coming up or going down. For a Saturday, that was weird. Ridgeback's pretty popular. I shook it off, told myself I was overthinking things. People hike at different paces, maybe I just timed it wrong, but the air felt heavier. You know that feeling when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, like someone's watching you, even when you know you're alone? That's exactly what it felt like. I pushed on, determined to make it to the top before the sun went down, but every step felt harder than the last. My breathing got shallow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After another 20 minutes, I noticed something strange. The trees, the rocks, the little streams that crisscrossed the path. Everything looked the same. Too much the same. I've been hiking long enough to know that trails usually have subtle differences as you go up, but not this time. It was like I wasn't getting anywhere. I stopped to catch my breath, and that's when I heard it. Branches snapping behind me, clear as day. I spun around, but there was nothing, no one, just the trail disappearing into the woods. My heart started racing, pounding in my chest. I listened, holding my breath, but all I heard was my own heartbeat. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe an animal, right? A deer or a raccoon. But as I turned back to keep going, I heard it again, closer this time. I didn't call out, didn't want to. Something in me, some primal instinct said not to. You know when you're a kid and you think there's a monster under the bed and you just freeze? That's what it felt like. Like if I acknowledged it, whatever it was, it would make it real. I sped up, trying to keep my breathing steady, but every few steps I heard it again. Someone was there. I knew it. But no matter how many times I turned around, there was no one. At some point, I stopped trying to make it to the top. I just wanted to get back to the car. I thought if I could make it back down the trail, back to where I'd seen people, I'd be fine. But no matter how far I walked, I didn't recognize anything. And then I saw it. The same twisted oak tree. I'd been walking in circles. I don't know how it happened. I was paying attention, following the trail markers, but somehow I'd ended up back at the same spot I'd passed hours ago. Panic set in. Real bone-deep panic. I don't know if you've ever been lost before, truly lost, but it messes with your head. The forest seemed to close in on me, the path narrowing even though I knew it hadn't changed. I checked my phone again, but still no signal. My brain was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I stay put? Should I keep moving? I decided to keep walking, but this time I slowed down, listened for anything out of the ordinary. I told myself to calm down, that I'd just gotten turned around. It happens, right? People get lost all the time. But then I heard it again. Those footsteps. Slow and deliberate, like someone was pacing behind me. My hands were shaking. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I finally called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded foreign, weak, like I wasn't even the one speaking. Nothing answered. The silence was deafening, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I took off. I don't know why, there was no logic to it. But I ran. I wasn't thinking straight, wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I just wanted to be anywhere but there. The sun had dropped below the horizon, and the woods were getting dark. Fast. That's when I saw the light. Faint, flickering like a campfire. Relief flooded over me. Someone was out here after all. I stumbled toward it, breathless, my legs like jelly. But as I got closer, the relief faded. The fire wasn't new. It was barely smoldering, like whoever had been there had left in a hurry. There was a backpack on the ground, half open, with clothes spilling out, and an old tent that looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. I shouted again, louder this time. "Hello, anyone?" But there was no response. Something told me not to stick around. I backed away slowly, heart racing, and when I turned to head back the way I'd come, there it was again, those footsteps. Closer, right behind me. But no one was there. I didn't run this time. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move fast enough. I just walked, as fast as I could, back toward what I hoped was the trailhead. The whole time, I could feel eyes on me. I could hear the crunch of leaves under footsteps that weren't mine. By the time I reached the road, it was pitch dark. My car was the only one left in the parking lot. I didn't waste any time. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove like hell, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't know who or what was out there that day, but I haven't been back to Ridgeback since, and I never will. Never. Story 2 credited to Josh Miller. I guess I should start by saying that I'm not one for crazy adventures. I'm just a normal guy, you know? I work a regular 9 to 5, live in a small apartment outside Richmond, and the most exciting thing I do is go on the occasional weekend hike with a couple of buddies. Nothing wild, just something to clear the head. So when Matt texted me that Saturday morning asking if I wanted to check out a new trail he'd heard about, I didn't think twice. It was the same routine: grab my hiking boots, toss a granola bar in my backpack, and drive out to meet Matt and Eric. Now, Matt's always been the more adventurous one. He's that guy who, if he hears about some off-the-beaten-path hike, he's going for it. Eric and I, we just tag along. He's got the gear, he's got the maps, and honestly, it's just easier to let him take the lead. That day, everything seemed normal at first. The drive was peaceful, just rolling hills and trees that hadn't quite lost their autumn colors yet. By the time I met them at the trailhead, I was feeling pretty good. It was cool, but not cold. Just that crisp air that wakes you up a bit. Perfect hiking weather, honestly. The parking lot was small. That's the first thing I noticed. Just a handful of cars and one of those wooden trailhead signs with faded maps and a few warnings about black bears and whatnot. We laughed it off like, when was the last time you even heard of a bear out here? Eric, of course, checked the weather and made sure his map app was loaded. No big deal, right? The trail started off easy, just like we expected. Nothing too steep, nothing sketchy. We talked about the usual stuff. Work, the game from the night before, Matt's latest failed attempt at dating, you know, guy stuff. But, as we got further along, things started to feel different. It was gradual, at first. The air felt thicker, like the trees were closing in around us. You ever get that feeling where the atmosphere changes, but you can't quite put your finger on it? That's what it was like. It's hard to explain, but the trail just changed. The dirt beneath our feet wasn't packed down anymore, and the path itself was harder to follow, like no one had been there in a while. Eric kept glancing at his phone, probably wondering if the map was leading us the right way, but he didn't say anything. I didn't either. None of us did. We came across this old faded marker, something that looked like it had been there for decades. The sign had some wear on it, and the words were barely legible, but it pointed to a different trail, a side path. Matt's eyes lit up. "Let's check it out," he said. Of course, Matt would be excited about a detour. Eric hesitated for a second, then shrugged. "Yeah, why not? I'll be honest. Something about it felt wrong. Not in a way that I could explain, but in the pit of my stomach, there was this nagging voice telling me not to go. But like an idiot, I ignored it. I didn't want to be the guy who says no. So we took the side trail. It was narrower, more overgrown, and the deeper we went, the quieter it got. I remember thinking, shouldn't we be hearing birds or something? But the woods were dead silent, not even a breeze. I started walking a little faster to catch up to Matt and Eric. By then, the trail was almost non-existent, just leaves and branches crunching underfoot, but we kept going. Then, we found it. It wasn't on any map Eric had pulled up. This small, old cabin, barely visible through the trees. The wood was warped, probably from years of exposure, and the roof had half collapsed. Eric and I stopped dead in our tracks. "What the hell is that?" I asked, even though it was obvious. It was an old hunting cabin or something, right? But here's the thing. There were no roads leading to it, no clear signs anyone had been there in years. Matt, of course, was already moving toward it, grinning like an idiot. "This is cool," he said, kicking open the half-rotted door. Eric and I exchanged a look, but what were we going to do? Leave him there? So we followed. Inside, it was unsettling. The air smelled stale, like mold and old wood. There was trash scattered around, empty cans, a couple of broken bottles, but that's not what bothered me. It was the bedding. A ratty sleeping bag balled up in the corner, like someone had been there recently. And the fireplace. It had ash in it, but no sign of a fire. "Looks like someone's been camping here," Matt said, still sounding way too casual. "Probably some kids screwing around." Eric wasn't so sure. "This isn't right, man. There's no way to get here, no roads, no nothing, and it doesn't look like anyone's around." His voice was tight, like he was trying not to freak out. I felt it too. That creeping anxiety that tells you something's not right, but you don't want to admit it. That's when we heard the noise. A rustling just outside the cabin. Not like an animal, not like the wind, but footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone walking around the cabin. Matt froze. Eric looked at me, and I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. Who the hell is out here? I moved to the window, just enough to peer through the broken glass. At first, I didn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. But then I saw it. Someone standing by the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. Not moving, not reacting, just standing there, watching. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark figure blending into the woods. "Matt," I whispered, "we need to go. Now." But Matt, in true Matt fashion, wasn't convinced. "It's probably just some guy hunting or something. Relax." But his voice was shaky. He wasn't sure either. Eric grabbed his backpack and was already heading toward the door. "We're leaving," he said, his voice firm. I didn't argue. Neither did Matt, finally. We stepped outside and the figure was gone. Just gone. I looked around, but the woods had swallowed them up. The silence was back too, that eerie, unnatural stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We started walking fast, but it wasn't long before we realized we had no idea where we were. The trail we'd followed was gone, just like that. I tried to pull up the map on my phone, but there was no signal, nothing. Eric's phone wasn't working either. We were lost and it was getting dark, fast. The worst part? We could still hear the footsteps. Whoever, or whatever was out there, they were following us. Close enough to hear, but just far enough that we couldn't see them. Every now and then we'd catch a glimpse of movement between the trees, but it was always just out of sight, like they were playing a game with us. I don't know how long we walked, maybe an hour, maybe more. By the time we found the gravel road where we'd parked, it was almost pitch black and my legs were shaking. We didn't talk, we didn't even look back. We just got in the car and drove, fast. That was the last time we ever talked about that hike. Matt stopped suggesting trails after that. Eric moved out of state a few months later, and we haven't spoken in years. But sometimes late at night, I'll think about that cabin, about the footsteps, and I'll wonder if we were really alone out there. Story 3 credited to Mark Avery. I knew I shouldn't have waited so late in the day to start the hike, but I've always been a little stubborn, you know? After being cooped up in the office all week, I needed to get outside, stretch my legs, breathe fresh air. So when 4 o'clock rolled around, I threw on my old boots, grabbed my gear, and headed for the trail. It's called Pine Hollow Trail, not too far from town, but just secluded enough that you don't run into a lot of people. And that was the point. I just wanted some time alone. It wasn't a long hike, maybe an hour or so to the lookout and back, but it had a reputation for being tricky, especially if you stayed out too late. That's why most folks avoided it in the evening. I figured I'd be fine. After all, I knew the trail pretty well. I'd hiked it a couple of times before. I just needed to keep an eye on the time, make sure I headed back before the light started fading. That was the plan anyway. So I parked my car at the trailhead and headed off, feeling the crunch of gravel under my boots. The first part of the trail was easy. Wide, flat, lined with pine trees on either side. It was quiet too, which is exactly what I wanted. Just me, the trees, and the distant sound of birds. I walked at a steady pace, feeling the tension of the week slowly fade away with every step. But about halfway up, the trail started to narrow. The trees got thicker, closer, and the path itself became rocky, uneven. It wasn't anything dangerous, just different, harder to navigate. I checked my watch, 5:15. Still plenty of light. I kept going, pushing myself to make it to the lookout before the sun dipped too low. And that's when things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. I noticed the usual sounds of the forest. The birds, the wind through the trees, had gone quiet, completely silent. At first I didn't think much of it. Animals go quiet sometimes, right? Maybe there was a predator nearby, or maybe I just wasn't paying attention. But as I kept walking, the quiet grew thicker, like oppressive. It made me realize how alone I actually was out there. I told myself not to overthink it and kept walking. The lookout was only about 10 more minutes up the trail. If I could just get there, I'd sit, take a breather, snap a few photos, and head back down before dark. That was the plan. Then, just as I was reaching a sharp bend in the trail, I saw something that made my stomach flip. Ahead of me, just off the path, there was a jacket. One of those brightly colored hiking jackets crumpled on the ground like someone had dropped it in a hurry. I walked up to it, and right away I noticed it was covered in dirt and pine needles, like it had been there for a while. I hesitated, glancing around. No sign of anyone nearby, no voices, no movement. Just that dead silence, hanging in the air. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just keep walking, ignore it. But another part of me, call it curiosity, kept nagging. I picked it up. The fabric felt damp, cold, like it had been out there longer than I'd expected. There was a tag inside the collar, but the name was faded, unreadable. Whoever it belonged to was long gone. I dropped it, dusted my hands off, and decided it was time to head back. The lookout wasn't worth it anymore. Something about the jacket unsettled me. Maybe I was overreacting, but when you're out in the woods alone, little things get under your skin, you know? And the light was starting to fade. I turned around and started heading back down the trail, picking up my pace. The air felt cooler now, like the temperature had dropped all of a sudden. I zipped up my jacket and kept my eyes on the path, trying to shake the weird feeling in my gut. And then I heard it. Footsteps. At first I thought it was an echo of my own, but no. These steps didn't match mine. They were heavier, slower, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze for a second, listening. The footsteps stopped too. I turned around, scanning the trail behind me, but there was nothing. No one. The trees were thick, the path was narrow. If someone had been there, I would have seen them. My heart started pounding in my chest, but I told myself it was just nerves. I was alone out here. Of course, I was hearing things. I pushed forward, moving faster now, not caring about the uneven ground or the fading light. I just wanted to get back to the car. But the footsteps, they started again. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. This time I didn't turn around. I didn't want to. It felt like someone was watching me, following me, but there was no way. There was no one on the trail when I came up. I would have seen them, right? I kept moving, faster now, practically jogging down the path. The footsteps quickened too, keeping pace with me, but always staying just out of sight. I tried to stay calm, but panic was clawing at the edges of my mind. I was alone. No signal, no way to call for help. If someone was out there following me, there was nothing I could do. I rounded a bend in the trail, my lungs burning from the cold air, and finally, the parking lot came into view. My car was sitting there, just as I'd left it. Relief washed over me like a wave, and I broke into a full sprint, not daring to look behind me. I reached the car, yanked the door open, and threw myself inside, locking the doors before I even caught my breath. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my racing heart. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I'd spooked myself, that there was no one out there following me. But as I looked out into the darkening woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, had been out there, watching. I don't know what I heard, or who it could have been, but I haven't gone back to Pine Hollow since. And if you ever find yourself out there on that trail, just keep an eye on the time. You don't want to be there when the sun goes down.